Bashar al-Assad is gone. It has been since 2011 civil war, which came to a dramatic and sudden crashing end just barely a week ago. And now people are trying to sort through whatever's left and try to figure out what's going to happen now. The big question is, okay, so Jolani and his HTS were able to move south and to basically just cause the domino collapse of the entire Syrian regime in nearly a bloodless coup. I think it's probably the best way to put that, at least initially. But the question has always been, and still remains, can he govern? And try to unpack this, we have one of our most favorite guests, and certainly a good friend of mine, Matthew Ho, to try to unpack a lot of this. Matthew is the Associate Director of the Eisenhower Media Network, former State Department official, and combat Marine. Matt, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Danny, it's good to see you.
That when I first heard that, HTS, which was kind of a rebranded al-Nusra, which was kind of a offshoot for a while anyway of ISIS, and then they kind of separated from them. I thought that this was my initial thought was this is going to be something like what we'd seen so many times before, where it was just the beginning of a lot of chaos. But as that headline that Gary had up there a second ago, this has a different feel to it already because, okay, it's fine that Jolani wants to rebrand himself and put on a suit and, tidy up his beard, whatever, and look, statesman-like and look Western-like, et cetera. But then when you take a look, Gary, if you can put that headline back up there again, you see that leaders all over the Middle East are sending envoys to him already. This is in the news just today that they're beginning to reach out. The Emirates, Jordanian has sent some people. Turkey, of course, has sent some people, et cetera. Everybody's trying to make good with him. And I'm a little surprised, and I just kind of want your initial view on this, that states seem so quickly in the region to move to this one fellow. Because to me, and here's the reason why I say that, it almost seems like they're taking a risk by doing this, by rewarding someone who used violence to overthrow a member of the Arab League, which they had just allowed Syria back in just a couple of months back, I think. And then they're just basically saying, okay, we'll just go with this guy here. Doesn't that make incentive for rebels in other countries to say, hey, maybe we can do the same?
Yeah, I mean, I think the juxtaposition, Danny, right, is with Afghanistan, 3 years later. And I don't think any nation has recognized the Taliban government. I might have missed it if it happened, but I'm pretty certain no one has at this point, including the Pakistanis. And remember, weren't the Taliban supposed to be a total and completely whole owned operation of the Pakistanis, right? And just to make that point about how oftentimes what we hear from the establishment, from the media, from those who are certain, turns out not to be true at all. But in this case, yeah, I think the two main explanations, Danny, for why we're seeing these delegations, all these foreign ministers show up in Damascus, is one, the U.S. is allowing it, right? And the other one is because it serves U.S. interests. This was a side that the U.S. has been on for the last 13 years. And then, of course, it serves all these nations' various interests. And so they are getting in there to make sure that their place is within the court of HTS now. And for many of them, the ones we've heard about that are showing up there, the Qataris, the Emiratis, these are folks who've been backing HTS and other jihadist opposition groups in Syria throughout the last 13 years. The Jordanians showing up. It's their neighbor. Might make some sense to do that for a whole host of reasons, but also too, the Jordanians are probably very nervous that something similar to HTS will spread into Jordan to take down the kingdom. Because of course, if you go back and look at HTS's ideology, which comes out of Al-Qaeda, the destruction of these Middle Eastern monarchies has always been a priority. So I'm sure the Jordanians want to make sure, you guys aren't still following that idea, are you?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's. I guess that they want to. And your point there about the United States, we put that on graphic display when we took this $10 million bounty off of Jolani's head right away, which I guess was the formal. Okay, you can go talk to him. But I want to camp on that just a second here, because, and it's almost pointless to even say this, or meaningless, that it's a kind of a gross double standard, because so we have sent delegations also to talk to some members of Syria. And it was pointed out in one of the articles I read this morning, it's the first time in over a decade, et cetera. And I'm thinking, hang on just a second. So here's a guy that a month ago was a declared terrorist. He's fought against us. He was in our prisons. We've said he's connected with Al Qaeda ideology. Even if he broke away from that particular group, he's rebranded like that means anything. But now we're going to go talk to him. No problem. But then we want to excoriate Tulsi Gabbard, who went to talk to Assad in 2017 for the purpose of trying to find any kind of a path to peace and, bring some kind of stability for the people of Syria, et cetera. And then she's just roundly excoriated. Now, then all of a sudden now here, a terrorist guy that until a couple of days ago was a terrorist by our definition. Now, all of a sudden we're going to talk to him. And I'm for this. I'm for talking to anyone, but it's just kind of, it irks me a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, particularly again, or not again, but particularly when you juxtapose it against American policy. And certainly just go back a few months ago when Israel was heavily bombing Lebanon, killing scores of civilians every day, assassinating Hezbollah's leaders. And what did you hear from the American political community? What did the American media echo? They've got blood. They've got American blood on their hands. Hezbollah has American blood on their hands. And so here you are with this case, as you just said, somebody who actually does have American blood in their hands in the sense of participating in the insurgency, the resistance to the U.S. occupation of Iraq. So those double standards. The same would be said about Iran. You can't talk to them. They're terrorists, right? They are the biggest state-sponsored of terrorism in the world. We say that every year the United States does. And, so essentially, Danny, you're looking at the double standards, the hypocrisy, that simply just doesn't matter. I mean, the American empire is going to do what the American empire wants to do. There are no standards. It's only its own pursuit of power. And then, of course, those individuals and institutions within it that similarly pursue that type of power for their own self-interest, not because they adhere to any principles, not because they've signed any treaty, not because they're good and decent, but just because this is the best way for power. And so that's what we've seen with HTS. The HTS is the best bet for the Americans in terms of carrying through this vision of removing the Assad government, turning Syria on the map to our color, and something that has been wanted in Washington, D.C. Since the 90s. I mean, I'm sure you've been talking about on your show. This all comes out of the clean break strategy. This is all the Project of New American Century idea in the 90s to remake the Middle East so that Israel is dominant.
And of course, if you're going down that path, then you've got to be seeing, we'll talk about this in a second, but it seems to me that there's a path being cleared from the South up to the next target on that list, which is Iran. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First of all, let's hear what Jolani himself just recently said about what he wants to do going forward.
خلال أيام سيعلن عن وزارة الدفاع وستشكل لجنة من قيادات عسكرية كبيرة لرسم هيكلية جديدة للجيش السوري القادم، ثم ستبدأ الفصائل بالإعلان عن حل نفسها والدخول تباعا. نحن لن نسمح على الإطلاق بأن يكون هناك سلاح خارج الدولة سواء من الفصائل الثورية أو من الفصائل المتواجدة في منطقة قسد. يجب إنهاء هذا الملف بأقصى سرعة ممكنة لأنه السلاح المنفلت في الدولة هو الذي يؤدي إلى اضطرابها وإلى عدم استقرارها.
Okay, so this is where it seems to me that there's going to be the first point of friction and the real question about, how effective is he going to be? Because all of these factions all over the country, and we've shown that map a few times, and you see all these different colors for who's got control of what. And then now each of those factions is armed. Now, how are you going to disarm the SDF, disarm the Syrian National Army, other of these groups that are under the HTS umbrella, some that are outside of it, all over the place, the Turkish forces in the north, the Israeli forces in the south? I mean, do you see any chance that he can accomplish that goal, and with what power?
Oh, I think he can, Danny, for quite a large number of the armed groups in Syria, especially the Sunni groups. We already saw Sunni groups that were allied with the SDF, the Kurds, and who were against the Assad government turn and give allegiance to HTS once Damascus fell. So I think what's going to happen is, and this is the smart thing, this is the sensible thing for the new government in Damascus to be doing: try and gain control of the country, try and keep the army intact. So the way I read this is that the majority of the army has received amnesty and could be given the chance to go into this new army. And that's a smart thing to do. Keep these guys paid. They're
well, yeah, and that's a real question. I mean, that's the first one we want to hit. With what money? Because apparently,
right.
Was it just that Assad was keeping all this money to himself and he had it but didn't give it to the soldiers, or what? Because he and apparently a lot of his cash is gone. So with what money is he going to pay these people?
Well, there will be a couple things. One, certainly, I'm sure the conversations at the end of last week between the U.S. diplomat Barbara Leaf and Jolani or Sharar or whatever we're calling them now will included sanctions relief, and certainly you've heard that as the main talking point coming out this weekend from Europe, from international organizations, including the UN, that sanctions relief is what's most needed. These draconian American sanctions that were a huge part, Danny, in helping ensure that Assad's government could be toppled, but have completely immiserated the Syrians, caused suffering well past the time that the guns fell silent, essentially in 2017. Sanctions relief will allow for money to come in. And of course, I'm sure that's a lot of what's being done today in Damascus, as the Jordanians come in, as the Qataris come in, as the Emiratis are there. Certainly all this falls under the Turkish umbrella. It falls under the American one, but the subset or the smaller umbrella, the umbrella within an umbrella, if you will, the Turks for us, this is part of the Turkish plan. So the Turks want HTS to consolidate power. They want all these armed groups, all these militias, all these whatever you want to call them, brought under their control. And that gives the Turks an effective army within Syria to pursue against the Kurds. And this, of course, is call for all these forces falling underneath the new Syrian army, that there'll be no unaccounted for weapons or no uncontrolled weapons or whatever the phrase was. It was primarily pointed at the Kurds, though. And let's go down
that path. What is the play for the Kurds? Now, I remember for many years there was lots of movement, especially after the U.S. had taken down Raqqa, the so-called caliphate of the ISIS, and taking all their land back, etc., with the help of the Syrian Democratic Forces, the Kurds, primarily the Kurds. And the question was, okay, now that that's gone, they should have started working with Assad to try to find out, is there any way for accommodation? Because they're going to have to live together. It's not like they can go anywhere else. And there would seem to be potential common cause there, but that apparently never went beyond just the idea. So now, though, you have this new regime. Is there any movement between the Kurds and the HTS to try to come to an accommodation, or is there real risk of Turkey coming in and actually killing large numbers of Kurds?
Well, excuse me. Yeah, I don't think there's any sense of an accommodation between HTS and the Kurds. Certainly nothing I've seen, and certainly HTS's alignment with Turkey, to be polite and call it that, right? And the Turks' own wishes, which are made clear for decades. Certainly you've seen the Turks amass military forces along their borders with the Kurdish control areas, as well as the Syrian National Army, which is the more secular of the two major opposition groups to Assad, whereas HTS, the Turks don't proudly proclaim their support. They're not overt about it. The Syrian National Army was a Turkish operation. Turks are fully proud to cite that as such. So you saw immediately when HTS began pushing out of Idlib, the Syrian National Army attacking the Kurds. And you've had this fighting that's been going on now for a couple weeks. There was supposedly a ceasefire between these Turkish forces and the Kurdish forces, but that never seemed to actually be put into place. So you have the Syrian National Army backed by the Turks, and you have to imagine there are Turkish troops, maybe their special operation forces, in combat now against the Kurds. But the Kurds are in a difficult place because the Turks have made it known very well what they want to see. They want to see a complete dismantling of the Turkish, excuse me, of the Kurdish autonomous areas in Syria. That's a direct threat to the Turkish government in Ankara as they see it. So what you then have then is, what will HTS do? And HTS has, made these calls to surrender your weapons. They've also made statements that there should be no distinctions among Syrians, meaning that the Kurds, who have been fighting for a very long time for, if not their own autonomy, some distinct citizenship within Syria, denoting their Kurdish, their Kurdish ethnicity, that's in opposition to what we're hearing from HTS. And then, of course, what do the Americans want? The Americans want to see Israel do well. Now, of course, maybe we'll get into this as well.
Yeah.
Israel and Turkey are on a collision course here. So how will the Americans manage that? But I feel, you hate to say it, right, Danny, but you've seen this play out with the Kurds before. The U.S. has abandoned the Kurds. They betrayed the Kurds over and over again. The earliest I know is 1973, which is the year I was born. That's when Nixon and Kissinger started arming the Kurds to try and just caused trouble with the government in Baghdad. And by, I think it was 78, the Kurds had been completely abandoned, and we had thrown our support behind the Iraqi government. And people know, of course, what befell the Kurds all these various times. So the Kurds, I have a bad feeling, I think a lot of people agree, are looking at potentially being in the same place where they've been before. So that gives them a lot of questions as to that gives a lot of question as to what they'll do. Will they stand and fight the Turks and the Syrian National Army, or this new Syrian government's army? Will they allow them to come in and then wage an insurgency? Will they retreat and consolidate closer to the Iraqi border? Will they try and negotiate? I mean, these are all the various things. I mean, there's so much dust in the air over Syria. We still really just don't know how things are shaking out. I mean, we still don't know what's going to happen to the Russians in Syria. Like, we still don't know what's going to occur with these 10,000 or more Islamic State prisoners that the Kurds and the Americans are holding in parts of Syria. I mean, you have all these various, we don't even really know what the government, the Salvation Government, as they called it, that HTS ran in Idlib, actually looked like. So we don't even have this really great predictor of what will the Damascus government looks like if HTS continues, running, if it decides to run Syria as it ran Idlib. We hear various stories coming out of there. So I don't even have a good view of what actually took place there. So we've got all these questions. The dust is very, very thick. And then when it settles, there'll be a lot of decisions being made by all these various interests, both foreign and domestic in Syria, as to how they're going to play it out. But I think the only thing we could be certain of, Danny, unfortunately, is that the Syrian people are likely still to suffer.
Yeah. That hasn't seemingly ceased to be the case for so many decades now. Interestingly enough, you talk about the dust not settled, and so it's really kind of too early to call a lot of these things. One person who is not hesitating to call an unmitigated positive thing is Brother John Bolton.
The Biden administration did the right thing over the past couple of weeks in destroying ISIS arsenals, weapons storage, ammunition storage areas. Israel's obviously done a lot to destroy what's left of the Syrian government's military. The regime in power in Damascus now is an ISIS offshoot. Now, they say that they've changed their ways. We'll see. It's I think, an unmitigated good for the region that Assad is gone, but it's a long way from being stable. And the last thing the U.S. should want is a terrorist state on the banks of the Mediterranean, bordering on Israel, Jordan, and potentially threatening us.
It's really hard to reconcile the words that he said almost in one sentence there, that this is an unmitigated good, but we don't want a terrorist state and all this. So I'm not sure how it comes to that, except this is my theory, is that because John Bolton is such an advocate of regime change operations, that he sees this as an unmitigated good. Yay, let's do more.
Yeah, and if there's another one that removes HTS from power, right, then he'll support that as well. He just thinks he's also, I mean, these are the acolytes of Kissinger, Brzezinski that dominate Washington, D.C. I mean, John Bolton, of course, the most extreme, the most high profile of these men and women, but they see everything in the chessboard, right? They see everything like the game of Risk. and that they have to maneuver pieces. And it goes so far, their fanaticism about it, Danny, right? How much they are fabulous about this is how the world works. It is reflected in this thing that they really believe that changing out one individual for another will have the effect on people that it does on them. That people don't care about food or housing, they don't care about being warm at night in the winter. What they really care about is who their leader is, right? I mean, like, this is the type of fanaticism you see in people like Bolton, how dedicated they are to their worldview. And that includes, this idea that any regime change is good regime change. And so, like, well, I mean, the idea that somehow these people can look at Syria and say, look, Assad is a terrible guy, but you know what? We support all kinds of terrible guys. The U.S. supports about 75% of the world's dictators, military regimes, monarchies, despots, whoever is supported by the United States with weapon sales and military assistance and things like that. So we support lots and lots. We support most of the terrible people in the world. So the idea that you couldn't hang on to have Assad hang in there, he could give stability to the region, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Somehow that is a worse deal than the idea of having Al Qaeda a child, essentially, third generation bin Ladenite, if you will, take over in Damascus. Somehow that's better than the dictatorship that Assad brought. But this is
I'll be interested in seeing over time. It makes tactical sense for them to do what they're doing right now, the HTS, to try to put on a good Western face and a regional face because they want the financial support or whatever. But I think that there's a potential problem for Jolani in that a lot of the people who were in Al Qaeda, Al Nusra, ISIS, etc., they are, as Bolton correctly said, an offshoot of ISIS, if anything else, because it's a lot of the same people that were formed there. Right. And it's unclear if they're going to be good long term with him becoming HTS or Jolani becoming basically just like another Emirate government, another country that's just run by somebody because that's kind of what they've stood against. So I'll be real interested in seeing that over time, how that shakes out. But
you see very easy, Danny, right? The idea of like a purer or a truer HTS as an offshoot, right? You see that all the time.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, these groups, the more extreme, the more pure of them, right? Saying this is not right because exactly here's a man who's making accommodations with his neighbors already, with the despot king of Jordan, with the Israelis, with the I mean, they've already had these relationships for decades. So maybe there is within the leadership of HTS this idea that the ends justify the means. But now that they've achieved the end, to your point, will they fall back on this idea of accommodation, of collaboration, of letting down their principles and standards, if you will, now that they've achieved power, where before maybe you could say they are okay with that because they were in the pursuit of power. But we'll see. One more thing. I mean, and there's so much to talk about. We didn't even talk about the U.S. troops in eastern Syria, right? We didn't even talk about any of that. So there's a lot here.
Yeah. Right. Well, and now let's go down to some of the other stuff. One of the things that Bolton mentioned there was the Israeli component. We talked a little bit about about Turkey up in the north and what some of the things they're doing. Let's shift a little bit to the south now and look at the Israeli part. Wanted to get your comment, first of all, on what you make really from every point of view of the 800 plus airstrikes that Israel has made since the fall of the Assad, just literally wiping out every kind of military capacity and capability that you can have. That's not that one right there, Gary. That's going to be in Gaza. I'm talking about in Syria, where they have just literally wiped out all the military capacity in Syria. What do you make of that?
Well, certainly the idea was to neuter Syria, neuter whoever comes in there, into ensuring that they are absolutely no problem for the Israelis, so that there is no type of threat to the Israeli military, particularly their drones.
Yeah, but see, I've heard that. But see, here's that doesn't seem to wash well with me because the stuff was already there and it already wasn't a play. I mean, all this axis of resistance stuff ever since October 7th, 2023, et cetera. Syria's the only one that did nothing. They never did.
Right.
And how many times did we see Israel attack the airport at Damascus or assassinate this person? They never retaliated against anything. So it was already neutered. So if it was already benign, is it just like, hey, we can, so let's do it?
I think there's some of that, right? Certainly there's some of that. This is the way we operate. We destroy everything we come across. I mean, that's certainly an Israeli aspect of their war making. I think, we have to ask, okay, why didn't they take out these Syrian stocks before? Why they were not a threat before? And was it because the Israelis had some agreement with the Assad government, or more likely, maybe an agreement with the Russians that, this Syrian military will not threaten us in any way, shape, or form? The thing now, essentially, what you have in Syria, Danny, is the best HCS can be is light infantry with some artillery and drone support. That's it. And so now the Israelis can control the border, including that buffer zone, as they call it, the area they've taken, invaded and taken past the Golan Heights. Now they can protect that with, an infantry brigade and some aircraft, some drones, right? They don't have to worry about HTS mounting up in tanks and coming into the Golan Heights if they got that, if they had that intention to do that, because I think the Israelis are right in attacking those Syrian positions from their perspective, because they don't know what's going to happen, right? I mean, so I think everybody is saying with if you were to look at the odds on this, I think probably most people are putting odds that Syria is going to turn into Libya. So, of course, the other aspect being is that they don't want any of these stocks, them falling into Palestinian hands. That's the big concern for the Israelis right now, is that Syria, a la Libya, when all those weapons left Libya, and a lot of them went to Syria, but a lot of them then went into other parts of Africa that helped these jihadist causes all throughout Africa, as we've seen that explosion in jihadist groups throughout Africa in the last 10 years, last 15 years. The idea being is that the Israelis want to make sure that nothing can fall into anyone else's hands.
Okay, so that makes practical sense. Yeah. But is there even a case to be made? International law, the rules-based order that we apparently challenge and champion, rather. Is there anything to that, or is it basically, yeah, they can, so they did, and what about it?
They can say they did, and what about it? I think that's we did it. That's it. What are you going to say about it? I mean, this is all, anything they can do to strengthen their position with regards to the next year or two as they move to annex the West Bank, they're going to do. And
so is there anything in the UN Charter? I think it's I can't remember what the number is, but is there anything in the UN Charter that allows one state to do that to another state?
No, absolutely not. No, I don't. I mean, the Israelis are claiming defense, as they always do, but they claim genocide as self-defense, right? The best way to protect yourself is to exterminate the other person. I mean, that's the way they view it. So no, this is Israel, as we've talked about before, right? As if many of them said, including, you've got that great, that great clip from Natalie Bennett. This is the best opportunity we've had in 50 years. And so everywhere they can take the opportunity, they're going to do so. And again, I think it comes back to this idea of what do they feel they need to do to prepare for the annexation of the West Bank. And that includes then maybe extending into Syria, even though you don't have that boundary with the Palestinians. The idea being having more control in Syria to preclude any type of Hezbollah-Iran relationship or operations together, particularly anything that would support the Palestinians as the Israelis move into operations that may very likely, particularly in the rural parts of the West Bank and areas B and C, resemble Gaza. And potentially might even see Jenin resembling Khan Yunis. The Israelis hate Jenin. They absolutely hate it. And I could see, as they move forward in their annexation, the clearing, the ethnic clearing of the villages and small towns, pushing people into the cities and isolating the cities in the West Bank. I think that's how they'll do the annexation, and making examples.
Well, and speaking of example, what worries me, continues to worry me, that headline that Gary put up there a second ago, this is from the Washington Post today, and which is a little surprising because the mainstream media in the U.S. has been pretty much all over, whatever Israel says, whatever Netanyahu says, and as opposed to the truth. But here you see Israel is demolishing northern Gaza, fortifying its positions. Now, this looping video that's being shown right here, watch it once the smoke clears. You see it looks like Nagasaki after the nuclear explosion. And you see this one building in the middle, but no, we can't have that. They have to even wipe that. You see, the rest of it is nothing but dust. This video was posted by a member of the Knesset, so the parliament of Israel. So this is obviously not something that's been hidden. They're just methodically leveling everything. It's almost like a demolition team moving through. And this continues on. And I guess because everybody's focused on Syria, they're focused on whatever is happening with the Russia-Ukraine war, fill in the blank. But this stuff just continues on without any kind of action. Is there any chance that the Trump administration comes in and changes anything that the Biden administration has been doing?
No. I mean, if anything, they'll give more support to Israel, particularly the approval to annex the West Bank. When I was, as you know, Danny, we talked about this. I was down there by the Gaza border 5 weeks ago now, and we were probably 2,000 yards, maybe more, maybe 2,500 yards from the edge of the built-up areas of northern Gaza, and you couldn't see anything. I mean, you could tell something was there, but you couldn't make it out. In 2,000, 2,000 yards, 2,500 yards. You're talking what a mile and a half, roughly, a little more. You should be able to make out 3, 4, 5-story buildings, and we couldn't because there was simply nothing there. And then what you also saw, to the point of the other aspect of this headline, was you saw vast clouds of dust, vast clouds of dirt from the Israeli earth moving equipment. So an area south of northern Gaza, you saw all this dirt up in the air, all this dust up in the air, massive amounts. And that was from the Israelis making, Gaza in their image, so to speak, fortifying it, building out these outposts, really establishing the Netzarim corridor as a hard and fast border between North and South Gaza. If people hadn't seen the news about the Netzarim corridor that came out this last week, it was either Haaretz or Plus 972, or one of the Israeli English language press had interviews where they talked to soldiers who were there who said, yeah, this was an absolute free fire zone. We shot and killed everybody we saw, everyone we wanted to see, everyone we wanted to shoot, we shot. I think that's what you're seeing. You're seeing there's the conversation about resettling Gaza is out and open. Nothing's being hid about it. There's supposedly a list of over 700 families willing to be the first settlers into Gaza, and there's action in the Knesset to make it happen. So I think within the next year, as we see the annexation of the West Bank begin, we'll start to see this resettlement of Gaza. I think, Danny, those Palestinians who are still left in the northern part of Gaza will essentially be put in concentration camps. And those south of the Netzarim corridor, I think the Israelis are going to worry about later. But they're essentially going to continue to immiserate them, continue to starve them, continue to kill them, bomb them as they wish, as they want. But I don't think for the southern part of Gaza that we should expect to see any different headlines 6 months from now or a year from now. The same headlines, right? Another building was hit. Drones killed a car full of children. Only 38 trucks got in today. Typhoid or something is spreading through Gaza now. I think that's an Israeli plan, because they don't have a plan for how to get rid of the people, the Palestinians in Gaza. I think they're going to continue to hope the Egyptians or the Jordanians, maybe that was something the Americans spoke to HTS about. So they say, hey, in the future, if you want to take some Palestinians, we'll make it worth your while. But they don't really have a plan.
This headline you were just talking about, this is 4 hours ago. This is brand new. And like you said, it's just the next one in line.
Yeah. And I think that's potentially, there's no reason I see why these headlines we don't see 6 months from now, a year from now, 18 months from now, continually like this. The Israelis have no plan for the south of Gaza. The world's not going to do anything about it. Everyone keeps trading with Israel. And eventually I think the Israelis are hoping that people just kind of, we're back to normal. And, we saw that a week or two ago with these reports of supposedly the Saudis and the Israelis talking again about normalization. But also, too, you could see that in the sense of how easy it'll be for the various church groups to restart tours of Bethlehem. The Israelis will figure out how you don't see the annexation happen, but they've already got that set up. If you're on a church tour to Bethlehem, to Jerusalem, you can go into Bethlehem from Jerusalem and never see the apartheid wall. You can go and you could never see anything that smacks of anything having to do with the occupation. Wow. What you'll see essentially is a very planned and direct route to the religious sites that makes it look like Palestine is very prosperous. What are these people complaining about? Occupation isn't so bad. They're doing better than, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm sure that's the plan that'll be. Just make things go back to the way it was. Business is business.
If that was the case, if this was the end of the territorial acquisition, one may make that argument. The problem is that there is one other thing that in the near term that may indeed change, and that is north. Now, one of the things, this is just my military analysis. I don't have any inside sources, et cetera. So I'm not completely sure how much of this is accurate. But when I look at how the Israeli airstrikes, these 800, basically just plowed through what was left of the Syrian military capacities, it's also kind of made a corridor up north of that into Iran. And we know for sure that there are a lot of people in Washington and Jerusalem that would love nothing more and seem to be planning on something next, as exemplified by Brother Jack Keane.
The reality is Israel has stripped away their air defense system, so the leadership in Tehran is not protected from an air attack. Their nuclear sites are not, nor are their rocket and missiles production sites, some of which Israel destroyed on the last attack. So they are very, very vulnerable, and they know it. This is more of a desperate situation. Iran is pursuing this nuclear weapon covertly at two sites, Saranjan and Parshin. Those are sites that have never been inspected by the IAEA ever. The current administration is aware of it. The incoming administration is aware of it. What are the options? I think I know where Prime Minister Netanyahu is. He wants to take down these nuclear sites sooner rather than later, and he doesn't trust Iran to dismantle the system if we use coercive diplomacy. That is the other option. Send a message to the Supreme Leader. President Trump leads that message, maybe signed by Netanyahu, and tell them he has an ultimatum. Dismantle your sites by a date certain, submit to inspections by the region, by the United States, by IAEA, UN inspectors. If you don't do that and you don't stop your malign activity in the region, then we'll cripple your nuclear enterprise using kinetic strike. That, I think, is what's in front of us. I think the incoming administration, in talking to Prime Minister Netanyahu, are working the options, and they'll eventually present those to President Trump for decision.
Now, you can say, well, Jack Keane is not in the administration. He's always been a war hawk, so that's just his outsider view. But it's also true that he's really good friends with General Kellogg, who is very much on the inside of Trump world. And obviously these kinds of folks in the Institute for the Study of War have a lot of influence over the administration. So do you see, or rather a different question, how do you see the threat or the risk that, in fact, when Trump comes in, he'll do exactly what Keane said there, work with Netanyahu and come up with any reason why we should attack Iran?
A lot of it I focused on, or I really caught on Keane's certainty that the Iranian air defense systems have been neutralized, and that not just their leadership and their nuclear facilities have been are not protected, but their rocket and missile systems are not protected. And the certainty in which he spoke of that. And, it's not just the administration, Danny, that Keane and Institute for Study of War and others have significant impact on, but it's also the Congress. They're the ones going in very often briefing the Congress on what's happening, as well as many of their staff people go on to work in Congress and vice versa. So this certainty that Israel could get it done, reminds me of the certainty of 2003, where it just was made clear that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you see this type of certainty coming from these political figures, these media figures, and you get worried. that, okay, do they really believe this? And what if it's not the case? I mean, what if Iran certainly has not lost its air defense capabilities? I don't think it has. I haven't seen any evidence to display it has. But then you have this issue that the Israelis have to take very seriously of the Iranian ballistic missile response. And the Iranians showed very clearly several months ago that they could get their ballistic missiles onto the targets that they want to in Israel. And so, this idea, this fantasy of dealing the final and ultimate blow to Iran by taking out their nuclear weapons, or their supposed or pretend nuclear weapons, or even decapitating Iran by taking out the supreme leader. None of it brings about regime change in Iran. None of it changes the status quo long term. I mean, there's sure Assad went down, but that was after the end of 13 years of civil war. There's nothing to suggest anything similar in Iran in terms of regime change being able to occur. So what happens then? Thousands of Israelis are killed in Iranian ballistic missile strikes for what? Just for the opportunity to say, does Netanyahu really think that this is the type of political move that will keep him in office, that will keep him out of jail? Is that, so there's a danger to it, because the politics and the personal interests of, men like Keane, men like Trump, men like Netanyahu are driving something that won't have any outcome strategically for them, but I assume they think the political outcome is worth it.
And you also have the outgoing administration seems to be helping along with this news out that, hey, by the way, a weakened Iran could hit back with a nuclear bomb. Trump was told by the White House, seeming to say, hey, they are getting close, and if we don't take action, something's going to happen here. But listen, this gets to something that you and I have for decades to each other talked about, and all throughout this current administration, we talked about basically that there has been the death of diplomacy. We don't even do anything about diplomacy, and now then here comes this incoming administration seeming to just like not only follow the same path but go up, because the only reason Iran would go to a nuclear weapon program is because we have left them no alternative. Make them believe we have just eviscerated all of this axis of evil, physically wiped out the leadership, and now regime changed in Syria. And Iran may conclude the only thing they can do to ensure their own national security is to get a nuclear weapon a la North Korea, et cetera. So then it seems though that the Western side is using this as, proof of what we've been telling you all along, that they're going toward a nuclear weapons, ignoring the actual reasons why they may go in this direction, and whether they are or not. As you just talked about from the weapons of mass destruction sample, we can just say they are, and that, my God, we have to act right now for our own survival as a nation, or some crazy thing like that. Hard to say. That's an overstatement. How do you view that?
No, that's exactly how they see it. It's the desire to this obsession, I should say, over Iran has been in this country for 40 years. And Israel smartly uses that obsession to distract from what's occurring in the Middle East that it's doing. So everything in the American and by extension Western lens is that Iran is the bad guy. And of course, why? Because the Iranians have American blood on their hands. Don't you remember? So it's a very easy setup. It's a very easy narrative to control. It's a very easy narrative to restart over and over again, which is what we see. And you also have to think, Danny, that the folks in DC, the people who talk about pressuring Iran this way, attacking Iran, all because we have to make sure they don't have a nuclear weapon. They have to work this out sometimes in their heads. If we do this, then what's Iran's response going to be? And it always allows them, whatever the Iranian response, to further escalate, right? So now it's the point where you have had this engagement with Iran and Israel and the United States over the last year that has, if you believe the White House, weakened Iran. I don't think that's the case, but let's just go with that. Well, that then means, of course, because they're weak, they're going to get a nuclear weapon. Now, if the White House assessment had been that Iran is stronger after the last year, then of course they're going to get a nuclear weapon because they're stronger. They're on a roll, right? They've got the confidence to get it done. I mean, so all these outcomes, all these desires are just the serve a singular purpose of this political obsession with Iran and the United States. And it's not even, the most important thing to remember is that for the Israelis, the Palestinians are paramount. So why then is Iran important to Israel? Because they feel that Iran provides support to the Palestinians that if they could get rid of, they'd have an easier time occupying, subjugating, taking control of all of Palestine. And for the Israelis as well, the Iranians, again, are helpful because the Americans are so obsessed with them. So, but it all keeps coming back in this idea that they're going to get nuclear weapons. Of course, why wouldn't they get nuclear weapons? If you were in their position, wouldn't you be pursuing a nuclear weapon? And this is something the whole region you look at these actions. Who can do anything to stand up to the United States or to Israel because they have nuclear weapons. And this is why, there have to be talks among the Turks about getting a nuclear weapon, particularly as they're on this kind of collision course, potentially in Syria with Israel. Everything in the last year, certainly they're trying to build themselves and find other alternatives so that they don't have to be subservient to the American empire, the Turks. But at some point they believe that will come. And then the other thing that they need to have for parity is a nuclear weapon. So why wouldn't they do that as well? And then you can make the same argument, of course, for the Saudis, for the Egyptians, for whoever.
So before I leave this topic here, and we're running a little bit low on time here, but there is something very, very different with Iran as opposed to Syria. With Iran, you have them in BRICS. And so you have China, who has very much wants Iran to stay as it is so that it keeps sending them 1.5 million barrels of oil every day.
Right.
And for the Russians, of course, they still want those drones help and the production and everything else that they have. So the question being, would Russia and China be a passive onlooker if Israel and the United States actually took out the regime and attacked them in any certain way? Or would they do something? Because, that's a major, major issue. On the one hand, you think China and Russia and BRICS, they can't afford to let the West just dictate and decide to knock out another country here, because then that makes the whole BRICS situation to all these other countries that they want to invite in look like, okay, you guys can't do anything. You can't even protect a brick. You can't keep it from falling, and you're physically going to lose and you do nothing. But then the alternative is, well, then they would do something to prevent military from falling. Then now you have the possibility of escalating into a regional / world war. How do you see that dynamic playing out?
I don't think either Russia or China has the ability to intervene, even if they wanted to, which they don't, has the ability to intervene any way meaningful in the Middle East in the way that like you and I would understand as a meaningful military intervention. They just don't have the expeditionary capabilities. But they don't have the desire. And so I don't think you would see Russia or China engaged actively in that sense, but certainly quietly behind the scenes, providing intelligence, providing diplomatic support, providing political and media support, as well as providing all sorts of supplies, assistance, new technologies, what have you. So I think you would see Russia and China in such a circumstance performing at the role that, say, the U.S. and EU does towards Ukraine, and certainly, but it's tough to imagine that a U.S.-Israel war with Iran lasts for that great of a time. I think it would just be a much larger exposition of what we've seen before, in the sense of just mass airstrikes on one another. The U.S. would try and sink all of Iran's navy, that type of thing. There'd be attacks on shipping, on both sides, so on and so forth. But I don't think there'd be any type of, I can't see how there'd be any type of land component, that would be involved, right?
We don't have it.
No, we don't have. Exactly. What are you going to do? We're going to put the one ID and and have them march through Syria, through Iraq, into Iran. The other thing, there's so much going on here as well, too, right? Like, what are the Yemenis going to do over all of this. We saw that last week. They shot a missile at Tel Aviv. The United States responded quite forcefully over the weekend, dropping a lot of bombs in Yemen. And, the same with the Iraqis. What's going to happen with the Iraqis with all of this? I think the Iranians and Hezbollah taking a strategic pause here, trying to figure out what they're going to do next, as well as try and figure out what Syria is going to look like, where the relationship with Turkey and Israel is going to be over this, feel out the Russians and Chinese and others more in terms of what they would like to see in terms of a more stable Middle East, and how could Iran then position themselves to be the ones who could provide that, to try and gain that support, to try and strengthen those relationships. And then, of course, what are the Saudis going to be doing? The Emiratis and the Qataris, they're certainly making themselves known, but the Saudis seem to be a bit quieter about it.
Yeah, well, it's going to be a mess. I think that that's the very best that could be said, and there's a lot worse that could happen, and we'll have to wait and see how that turns out. But one of the things upon which all of these things are going to continue to go forward is going to be the new administration. And in the last few minutes we have here, I just want your assessment of where you see things can go, because Trump has been making some really crazy statements here of late, like saying that he wants to take the Panama Canal back, that he wants to get Greenland back, that he wants to make Canada the 51st state, that he's seriously considering using U.S. military action against Mexican cartels, etc. I mean, all of those things seem to be more and more militaristic, even than certainly the Trump 1.0 or the last Biden administration, the ongoing uniparty we've had for a long time. Do you see any hope that this is just hyperbole or whatever, but that once he gets in office, then he'll start to use diplomacy more? Or how do you see this shaking out?
I'm not sure what he'll pursue, Danny, in terms of his options. I mean, he's all over the place in all this. Certainly, I don't think there's any danger of the United States invading Panama, but you could very easily see a very strong push of sanctions, basically a financial corporate type takeover of Panama by the United States, some type of color revolution, if you will, to remove the government of Panama. And so certainly I think 4 years from now, we could look at Panama and see it essentially only as an owned entity of the Americans in everything but name, right? So I mean, there's all kinds of different ways these things can be pursued without dropping bombs. But you have to like the makeup of Trump's team, of his government, and none of these people are shy about using force, of using violence, and so I think they'll try and utilize everything they can to achieve their aims. I think the of those four things there: Greenland, Canada, Mexico, and Panama, all of which are absolutely nuts. I think the biggest danger in that would be that they actually do start doing strikes into Mexico. That they've watched too many television
Netflix movies.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm trying to think. What was that movie, Sicario?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, like that type of thing. Oh, we'll just send Delta down there and they'll take these guys out and everything. I mean, I think those fantasies.
Credits roll and problem solved.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how it works on Netflix anyway. Last question I have for you related to this, though, is I guess more long term. And because one of the things I worry about is that when people around the world that keep seeing this, that becomes the new character of the United States. We're no longer seen as a city on a hill and, somebody a force for good and all this other kind of nonsense, which probably was always an exaggeration, but at least it was an aspiration and a mental image. Now that it's been replaced with this kind of stuff, and I worry that over time that will deepen fear in adversaries. And when people are afraid, then they may be willing to take risks later on in a bad set of circumstances to exploit that out of just fear to take care of themselves? Or do you think that we can just go on like this literally indefinitely and just being the new empire on the block?
Well, I mean, certainly we've got the 3 M's on our side, right? The military, the media, and the money. And when you have that, you can keep things going just by the inertia of the weight of those things, right? Of the power of those things. But as we're seeing, things are crumbling, things are fracturing. Certainly, the idea of getting away from the American empire seems for most governments in the world, including those within Europe, that this is the right way to move forward. That there are better options. That continuing to be underneath a dying empire, with its complete disregard for international law, for international institutions, with its moralizing about rules-based order, and its fear-mongering and its war-making, is not the right place to be. So I think we'll continue to see over the next decades the building of alternatives, things like BRICS, of course. And the danger then is that as the United States loses and weakens, it loses its power, loses its place in the world, across all orders. That the United States will react harshly to that.
Yeah, and I think that ironically, I think if you look back through history, generalizing, of course, there are always different reasons for many things, but there is a common theme that throughout millennia of various empires falling, one of the big ones has been economic problems, economic collapse, which then, because without our economy, without our power there, none of these other things are possible. And if we start getting a situation like that, then we could start to crumble from within anyway. And then, as you also, I think, Guyana just alluded to, dying empires never go out quietly. They always try to strike back, to cling on to what they have, and they don't take, soft landings. They try to lash out, which almost always exacerbates the thing. And I do worry about that medium and long term for the U.S.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you can see just in the rhetoric that we see now say about tariffs. We're a nation that imports. We're not a nation that produces. And we saw how we handled, moderate levels of inflation in this country. And the idea of just that one aspect, that we're going to increase the cost of everything we bring in, that we consume, as the biggest consumer society by far in the world, that won't have repercussions on all levels and all stratas within the U.S., including decisions by our foreign policymakers or by our policymakers. There's this idea in the United States that the way we display our power is by our action overseas, that's the determinant of American strength, is our acts overseas, as opposed to our power here at home. And you've seen that in our prioritizing, since the end of the Cold War. Rather than investing ourselves, building ourselves out, strengthening our infrastructure, our education, our healthcare, all the things that would really make the United States strong, that would have maintained its economic hegemony over the world as it had it, we've filtered it all away. Right. I mean, a lot of it is because of policies of financialization, but also, too, a lot of it's because of our foreign policies that have been paramount in determining this is where our strength is going to be. So rather than concentrating our efforts, focusing on ourselves domestically, we focused internationally. And now we're in this position, as things start to fall apart, as things start to crumble, as the empire loses power. Well, those events, those consequences have great effect here in the U.S. And of course, it's a self-serving cycle, right?
Yeah, I guess one of the most poignant example at the moment about stuff that could make it would make all the sense in the world to say, okay, Syria has just collapsed as the nation that we knew. Now that here's this new one coming in, all this stuff. Okay, let's get these stupid number of U.S. troops out of Syria. Let's just get them out of there and bring them home there. They have no more value in there. Let's let these other guys taken care of. Instead, here's what Pat Ryder thinks we should do.
For deployments, it's not uncommon as units come in and go, come in and out, the replacement in place, transfer of authorities, those kinds of things, there will oftentimes be a bump, right? So the total number of forces officially deployed to Syria is 900. So that in and of itself, in terms of the additional numbers, as you know, over the years, that can fluctuate. Obviously, given the current situation in Syria, just very recently, I was made aware of the fact that, hey, maybe there's more forces than just a small number, or what would normally be considered around the 900 range.
And that number is like more than double what it was. So it was
Right.
2,000. And then we had Matt Miller, I think a day or two after that, was answering a question, said, oh, yeah, we're still trying to figure out what the additional troops into Syria. Never explained what that was even for. But now that they're talking about even more above that for no reason. So instead of bringing it down, instead of the administration before it goes out saying, all right, you know what, let's just shut this deal, bring the boys home, they're adding to it. And how often do you think Trump's going to come in and go, yeah, I see that ad. Yeah, we'll shut it down. Or he'll go, I'll see your 5 and I'll raise you another 2, something like that.
Yeah.
So there is, we're addicted. We can't do anything that makes any sense. We have to send more troops out there.
Right. No, it's it just, and then we have the whole aspect of, we're supposed to be a democracy, Danny. Like, we're supposed to know about these things. And the fact that we have our leaders and their spokespeople who so willingly and enthusiastically lie about it and badly lie about it. Certainly this idea that's no big deal, that we've got twice as many troops in Syria, probably most of whom are National Guardsmen or reservists, so it's not that big a deal that they're there, right? But you can't talk about it. It makes no sense. The disrespect for us, the way it's expressed to us, don't worry about it, it's not a big deal, but we can't tell you about it. That dissonance there is what just we see over and over and over again from this administration, what we'll see from the Trump administration. And the idea is, I think that point of why are they there? When did they get there? There is, how much was the United States involved with HTS, this known terror group? Or, again, as we were saying before, Jolani, $10 million bounty on his head. How much was the U.S. coordinating with HTS prior to their takeover of Damascus? I think most of us believe a lot was going on, but how much did we put troops there because we knew this was going to happen? Or have we had 2,000 troops there for 10 years now and they've never said it? We don't even know. So we can't even understand what they're trying to do, what the purposes are. And a lot of it, I kind of agree with you, where they don't have purposes. This is just what's done. This is just this is just the what you come to expect. This is
how
what
empire's done.
Yeah.
Anyway. All right. Well, listen, we'll leave it there for now. We could probably just keep going on like this for a while, but really appreciate you coming on today, Matt, and give us some of these, really good insights in here, especially when you were just in the region, just a couple of weeks ago. So appreciate that. Also wish you and your family a Merry Christmas if we don't see you before then. And we just thank you for everything you've done for us over this past year. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Danny. Thank you to Gary as well, behind the scenes. But happy Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah to everyone who's watching and listening, and most especially Danny, to you and Gary and your families.
Thank you very much. And we appreciate you guys too. Be sure and join us this afternoon, by the way, at 3:00. We're going to be looking at some of the comments that happened over the weekend in the Russia-Ukraine war, where Putin has vowed destruction on Ukraine for that 9/11 style drone attack. You may have seen our show over the weekend on that. You might want to try to watch that before 3 so you can get the context of this. But we'll be seeing about what may come next. 3:00 this afternoon on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.